Hey, Max, how you doing?
Hey, Jared. I'm doing really well. How are you?
Pretty good. Just coming out of the holidays. Spent was doing a lot of heads down work, but it feels to be good. I don't know, something fresh. A new opening has happened, so it'll be exciting to see what happens in 2026.
That is
How about
exciting.
you?
Probably the exact opposite of lots of heads down work. I've been enjoying some time off from work and haven't been really productive at all. So I think we're in a good space where there's a big difference between what you're coming out of and what I'm coming out of. So we'll see what comes out of this.
All right. Well, I'll get some of your relaxation vibes, and then I'll send you some focused, intentional energy your way.
I'll be
Speaking of
invigorated.
Exactly. Speaking of intentional energy. So what are we doing? So we are recording this kind of impromptu podcast. I guess if it's called a podcast still, if it's on video. I don't know. I feel like an old man. That sounds strange to me. Um, but we've been planning a new course for early 2026 in Evolving Ground, and thought the best way to give a bit of a sneak peek into what we have planned for folks was to just have a kind of open-ended conversation of both how you and I relate to the material and what is it good for and all those things. Does that sound about right?
That sounds perfect. I'm really excited about this course coming up. Have been for a while, and yeah, looking forward to talking about it.
Cool, cool. So yeah, the course is called, we have viewers, so I guess we have to remind ourselves
Mhm.
to inform people. It's called Kaleidoscope of Interaction. Um, it's a kind of series of practices that we've been working with for a couple of years now, at least 2, 3 years or something. I think so. Charlie um, and David kind of initially set up the framework, and we've been noodling with it for quite some time. And it feels this time around doing the course, it feels really buttoned up in a way that like we know what to expect, we know how to pace. We've tried to do too much at once before, so we're setting things up a little differently this way at this time, but it feels properly mature. Um, yeah, I guess the maybe I could give the broad framing. Um, we talk a lot about patterns of interaction. So it's very much about training kind of social, interpersonal ways of relating, as opposed to just sitting on the cushion, which is a bit different, I guess, than um, some of the most common Buddhist-y stuff out there. Um, and when I was thinking about it earlier, I was like, really, it seems to kind of boil down to um, the difference between being extremely kind of reactive and habitual in social circumstances, or being more kind of choiceful and responsive to the given conditions, as opposed to kind of running on autopilot and in patterns that we've gotten used to before. Yeah, does that sound like a decent characterization? How would you have you how would you layman's it, or what's your TLDR of Kaleidoscope? Does that align pretty well?
Yeah, well, one of the things that we like to do in Evolving Ground a lot is we like to describe things in terms of the principle and function relationship that's at work. And I think what you just outlined is a really good way of understanding the principle and function of Kaleidoscope of Interaction. So let's see, if I were to put it any differently, I might say that the principle of the Kaleidoscope of Interaction methods is receptive presence or receptivity, more generally speaking. And then the function is traditionally, we might say something more like liberation. I think in a more contemporary way, we could say choicefulness in how we interact. I think ultimately, all the different methods in Kaleidoscope of Interaction ultimately function towards choicefulness.
Yeah, and I like that you highlighted the receptive presence, because that's kind of like the ground floor of choicefulness is like if I'm not actually aware of what is happening in this unique moment, in this unique interaction, then the capacity to make a choice about following an old script or innovating or trying something new or anything in between, and this kind of comes to that liberation side of things, is what it's like to act that is both informed by our patterns, but not completely defined by them. They're kind of free to show up in ways that surprise you, and a little different than maybe common ways of framing the habitual ways that we show up in interactions. Maybe it's more common for it to be kind of like this is um, a dysfunctional or unhelpful way of relating, and here's a better one. So let's replace the previous one. This is a bit radical in the way that it's kind of saying, no, those past patterns are they were used for reasons. They have functions. We don't need to throw them out. But if we can really be present in that moment and receptive to what's happening, then they become a little bit more free to show up differently. And the weirdest thing for me always was too is like not only for them to show up differently or you to tweak them, but also like to be surprised even yourself. That was kind of one of the biggest results of spending a lot of time with Kaleidoscope. Is that I was really pleasantly surprised to see the way that I was acting and be like, well, that's not a Jared thing to do. Like, what? That's interesting move there. And I don't know if it's always the perfect response. Definitely not. But yeah, it loosens things up. I feel a lot of freedom to choose and move in different directions.
That's been my experience too. The opposite sometimes happens too in a way that's really nice, which is I'll see myself at work in my typical patterns, but the choicefulness of that is obvious. And so it seems a lot less problematic. It's just like, oh yeah, there's a Max thing. That's like a characteristic Max thing to do. That's kind of funny or charming. And it could be otherwise.
Mm,
It's occurring to me that maybe to contextualize when we say patterns of interaction, which is like at the heart of the kaleidoscope of interaction course, um, one of my favorite things is the way that kaleidoscope contextualizes patterns of interaction. So there's this way of describing them. It's perception, interpretation, response, and then often justification as well.
mhm,
And I think when we talk about this upcoming course that we have planned for February, the way that it fits into the larger frame of Kaleidoscope of Interaction as like a suite of methods, and then also the ways that Kaleidoscope is different from other methods of addressing patterns of interactions, the ways that it's unique there. I think if we look at if we look at perception, interpretation, response, and justification, a lot of that will probably be borne out. So, for example, how does Kaleidoscope of Interaction, um, how does it address this way of understanding patterns of interaction?
mm. Yeah, I'm one. I like that you've kind of pulled together all the pieces of what makes up a pattern interaction. Um, and I know it's a very EG thing to use words in slightly specific and slightly unordinary ways. And I'm thinking that it might be useful for us first to kind of break down what each one of those components are. And
Good idea.
the nice thing about or the to kind of go back to the beginning, um, noticing how we react in very habitual ways. Uh, the the punchline here being that in a habitual reaction, all of those things unfold kind of immediately. I was thinking the first time we did Kaleidoscope, material, and I was working with this pattern that was really interesting, which was anytime somebody complimented me, I would immediately deflect or change the topic, and I had no idea why, right? And so, and even in this framing of saying that I was doing all these things in a row, I was like, no way, it's just like there's no space in between those, and the all the methods really are to kind of peel apart that instantaneous response into finding, loosening them up and seeing what's in between. So in that framework, it would have been like the perception is somebody says thank you to me. And then there's some sort of built-in interpretation about what that means about me. I think mine was something about, I mean, and these aren't true things, but after a while, I kind of learned that it was, I was interpreting it as being kind of put on a pedestal or something. And then my response was to deflect it. And the justification was that being put on a pedestal is very bad. So like, and it took a month to pull all of that stuff apart, um, and kind of find some space in between there so that I could both understand it, and then strangely, it started working differently in mysterious ways. It wasn't very. The methods are kind of diving into that content, and then for me, the way that it showed up in everyday life was just kind of more spontaneous. Yeah, I don't know. I might have gone off on track now, but I just wanted to unpack that whole kind of uh, that whole series of reactions or bundled bits and pieces of interaction.
Bundled is a really good way of describing it, I think. And no, I think this is perfect because this really it sort of gets to the heart of like what we're talking about when we talk about patterns of interaction and how we're using these words in this context. So in that pattern that you were just describing, first perception. So what you're hearing somebody saying the words "thank you," no, it was giving you a compliment. It wasn't thanking you, right? So it was like saying something about
Something
you.
like that. One of the two,
Yeah.
yeah. Compliments, thank yous, all of them. They all kind of felt similar.
I'm probably like applying my own on there. Like one of my patterns that I've noticed if like somebody's saying thank you to me and me saying like, oh no. It's like instantly negating their thanks, which is a pretty
Mhm.
funny thing to do. But so anyway, so your perception of somebody saying a nice thing to you, you see them, you see their visual display, the person's face, you see them moving their mouth, so they're saying something, you're hearing the words. This all sounds probably pretty obvious to anybody listening that that's what a perception is, but it's good to be clear that that's what we mean.
Yeah.
And what follows, and often so quickly that it's like it's mistakable for the perception itself, is the interpretation of that perception. So in this case, oh, they're putting me on a pedestal. Somebody's like putting me up here where I don't belong. Yeah. And so quickly, the response can really be the first thing that we notice often.
Mhm.
So maybe, oh, I noticed that I'm saying like, oh, no, that's no big deal. Or maybe I'm saying like, well, yeah, but also, uh, yeah, I know you rolled in jujitsu, so it's like, oh yeah, I did pretty well in that match, but you should have seen me like the match before that. Oh man, I did
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
bad. So um, there's something about the way that these patterns can be bundled up together that teasing them apart, really finding awareness in all the different aspects of these patterns can be well, it can be an undertaking. It can take some time and some care to do.
Yeah. Yeah, and we usually and the way that we've constructed the course is that we actually do kind of start in that order. So we start with perception. That is going to be this first. Um, we're separating the kaleidoscope uh, material into discrete courses, and the first one primarily is working all with that perception. And the primary method we call is liberating perception. So it is really about exactly what you said. It is unbundling perception from interpretation, because we so often are doing a lot of we can't the meaning and the conceptual understanding of what's happening in the situation just is completely intertwined with the sensory experience, and that's always hard because even when we talk about interactions, we rarely are like, and then his face turned slightly more red, I think, and his eyes, and it was cold in the room, and it's like these are not details that we're usually attending to. And I think he was judging me because well, I have a history, and that's so we're off to the interpretive dance quite quickly. So that is that very beginning of just getting into the raw kind of perception of the thing that kind of initiates or triggers that whole um, uh, bundled response is what we're focusing on to begin with.
Maybe we could go there next. We could talk about the main method of this upcoming course of Kaleidoscope of Interaction, and talk about how that relates to what comes later in this series of methods, and also how it's useful or could be beneficial on its own as well as its own practice with its own results.
Yeah.
So the method in question, this is liberating perception. And liberating perception can Jerry, could you say something about how does liberating perception work? What exactly happens when we practice liberating perception?
Mm. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of interesting. I think we've talked about this before too. So we have a primary meditation, kind of formal seated meditation involving ground called opening awareness. Um, and, uh, and that looks a very specific way. And then, you stick with it long enough and you start to notice things change in everyday life. Um, and, it's not always obvious. It's not super obvious. It's not something you're trying to do, but one way of characterizing it would be to say that it is uh, liberating perception from your kind of habitual patterned ways of interacting in the world. So the sitting practice is kind of approaching this uh, um, awareness in kind of simple perception, moment to moment perception. And the kaleidoscope material is approaching that kind of same domain, but from a completely different space. It's like starting with the content. We talk about recent experiences where we noticed our bundled reactivity, and noticed what we were aware of and what was in perception, what wasn't in perception, and that just knowing what we've excluded or what we foreground in simple awareness uh, seems to make some sort of suggestion. It just shows up. Like you were saying, um, in I do jujitsu a lot, and I have these sparring rounds, and another pattern that I had worked with was something strange, habitual was happening, and I did this liberating perception method with somebody where they kind of asked me in this back and forth process. When I was acting in a habitual way, they're like, "Oh, like what was going on in the room? What did you feel in your body? What did the other person's face look like?" And I remember when they said, "What did the other person's face look like?" I was like, I have no idea. That is not something that was in perception at all. And that was just like a curious thing. And then I just found myself the next time I was going to jujitsu, uh, being able to perceive people's faces. And all of a sudden that pattern just started working differently. Maybe it was easy to apply this rote reaction when I didn't know who I was actually sparring with. It was like, yeah, just I'm sparring. I've done it a million times. Same reaction every time, and just the simple act of um, being aware of the face of the person kind of decoupled uh, um, that habitual response. Yeah, I've gone off on a bit of a tangent, but yeah, bring us back to the core of things here.
No, I think you've described what for me is maybe the most exciting thing about the Kaleidoscope of Interaction series. And it's this distinction between on the cushion practice and what we might call life practice, or just practice off the cushion in a more informal context in general. So often when we do like a seated meditation practice, which can be really helpful to do, I advocate for it if people have an interest. But what it often feels like is that we are like bringing awareness to the situation. Like we're
Hmm.
we're sitting down so that we can bring awareness to what's going on. But then, out in the real world, these situations happen to us spontaneously. And once we've gotten familiar with liberating perception, it can be a lot more like the world is sort of bringing awareness to you. So without having to enact some really like effortful method or technique to maintain awareness in everyday life, it's like the situations that just naturally arise in everyday life do all of the work for you once
Right.
you have really gotten used to this way of being receptive, which liberating perception trains.
Yeah. 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 It is a. I'm just reflecting too, just kind of putting myself in the shoes of early meditation Jared, and exactly as you said, there was this kind of assumption that uh, progress in my practice, or um, being more mindful or more aware, was this thing that I had to kind of vigilantly do all the time. And if I forget when I'm off the cushion, which is the easiest time to forget, um, then I failed, and there wasn't enough effort. And this kind of is a lot of um, the, I mean, it seems pretty radical in some ways. It would have been radical to young Jared to say like, oh, actually, you don't have to effort. You don't have to do awareness. And our practices involving ground are really built on the foundation of um, being open to experience enough that awareness just finds you. It's not a choice, and yeah, so it's this effortless awareness or effortless mindfulness, I guess, would be a way of phrasing it in the more public meditation community or something like that. Like it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't, there's no, the mechanics don't add up. I don't know, but man, oof, what a relief when I found that type of awareness, and saw what becomes possible and how things change, how our interactions, how our relationships, and we can stay fresh and stay present and be really adaptive and fluid and change in ways that we can't imagine. Um, yeah, it's pretty amazing.
It is. It really is amazing. I mean, especially because um, these patterns where things are especially difficult or just feel off, oftentimes when we're trying to work with a pattern of interaction, that's why. It's because something about it just doesn't seem right. It feels like it needs some work. Those become the patterns where awareness is the easiest to find, or where awareness most readily finds us. So it truly is amazing. I'm quite grateful for it. That's why I'm so enthusiastic about it. So there's something here as well that might be interesting for us to discuss. So that's the difference between kaleidoscope of interaction, maybe most specifically liberating perception, and other ways that people might be most familiar with today of working with patterns, personal patterns, patterns of interaction.
Mm.
Anything come to mind there for you?
Yeah. I mean, we brushed on it in the beginning, but yeah, the main thing that I hear when it comes to um, both kind of noticing and figuring out how to uh, stop doing the habitual things that seem to be causing harm in your life or dysfunction, just aren't working anymore, is usually to figure out how to fix them or replace them or um, suppress them or whatever it is. They all kind of fall into that effort domain. Um, I don't know. Is there any kind of another one that I was thinking of that was really impactful for me, and not to say that these are um, wrong things to do. They have value. I had tons of value from them. I think one of my biggest ones, as I was thinking it through, was I would often uh, find myself going into a social context that I knew was going to be tough, and I would very deliberately kind of bring up a role model of mine, and try to do what they would do. Like what would they do? I'm going to do that thing. I'm gonna kind of act as they do, and leave the Jared patterns away because they're stuck in some weird way that I don't know how to deal with. Um, but yeah, I don't know. What about you? Can you think of things personally, or or just common common approaches that you hear out and about in the everyday world?
Yeah, well, the term that's coming to mind for me when you describe that is behavioral, which is, I think, a pretty common way of understanding patterns of interaction and making changes in the domain of patterns of interaction. So it's understanding, okay, what do I do? What do I do that seems in some way problematic? How can I learn how not to do that, either by renouncing that particular behavior or by taking on some kind of better, more healthy, more pro social behavior instead?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, you know, I'm relating it personally to an experience of going through psychotherapy years ago that was mostly behavioral. It has most to do with the way that it worked. So it was looking at behaviors that I personally saw as being problematic that I wanted to change, and then figuring out ways where I could just not exhibit those behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, I mean, that can be really helpful. I don't think uh, there's no understanding here that um, finding receptivity to liberate patterns of interaction is the only way that you can work with patterns of interaction. These other ways of working are absolutely functional. But
Hmm.
it's interesting to see their distinctiveness, to know whether or not something like Kaleidoscope of Interaction might be useful for a person in
Yeah.
particular.
Yeah, it's having me. Another thing that we do a lot in Evolving Ground is talk about failure modes, and we'll usually kind of say, okay, your uh, your personal practice is kind of put you at a leading edge, and maybe you want to change your behavior, maybe you want to change the how often you're present, whatever it is, and there's different ways and different worldviews that you can bring to accomplish that transformation, and uh, we really like to both talk about like kind of what is the underlying principle of the approaches. So like you outlined one, which is renunciation. This is problematic. I'm going to stop doing it. Very obvious, very useful, kind of human 101. We do that all the time. Um, and I guess the question would be, kind of thinking through like what would the failure mode be in some of those cases, and if I'm thinking about it from in my experience, um, there's something. It's something like um, instead of relating your behaviors and patterns of interaction as kind of uh, wholly good or wholly bad, um, we're kind of framing them a little bit more in like dynamic and functionality. Like um, is this appropriate for this context? And knowing that each context is a little different. And the failure mode is when we get trapped in it. So, I just can't accept a compliment. And that's causing problems. Like I would like to accept a compliment every once in a while. Like it's being offered to me and I'm like, no thanks, take it back. Um, and and the approach of doing something completely different, just replacing that behavior with I am going to wholeheartedly accept the compliment. You're welcome. Thank you. That is a way of breaking that habitual thing. The failure mode, I think, that comes with that is that new pattern that you've replaced it with can eventually become just as rigid, just as stuck as the one that you started with, which is why I think that would kind of be the moment where the question of like, well, what's another way of doing this where I'm not prescribing the way I need to be, but entering interactions um, in a more fluid and dynamic way where I'm changing things, I'm adapting things, I'm being a little bit more creative and interactive in the way that the patterns are shaped. Yeah, I don't know. Is that landing for you?
Oh yeah, I mean, you're putting me in mind now of systematicity. I mean, learning a new way of acting in the world that has reliable outcomes that seem to move things in a direction that you like more. That's wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful. There can also be this experience of coming to recognize that that new pattern, like you said, has become a new kind of restriction on circumstances, a new way in which we are somewhat out of touch with our present circumstances.
Mm,
Now, maybe on the whole, they're more responsive. They help us stay in touch more, but there's still something that's a bit off because every systematic way of understanding what's happening and responding is going to have its limitations. There's just no way around that.
mhm,
So you talked about a way of renouncing certain ways of being. When you were talking, I was reminded of a personal pattern that I would have been trying to address back in like my mid to late 20s when I was going through psychotherapy. And this was people pleasing behavior. I had started to recognize that I was always trying to seek validation from other people, trying to make other people happy, and so on, often to the expense of what I wanted to do or my felt sense of well being. And one way to deal with that is just to renounce the activity altogether, just to be like, I'm never going to people please anymore. But even at that stage in my life, it was pretty obvious that that was not the move because sometimes, say, at work or in a high stakes situation, it actually makes a lot of sense to appease another person. So instead, what I became interested in is there a way of changing how I interpret what is going on such that something changes. And in my case, that was mostly just coming to an understanding that people mostly are not that concerned with you. Like people are not all that worried about like what I'm saying about them. They're not too worried about what's going on with me. They're just not that interested. They're more interested in whatever is going on with them. They're not paying that much attention to me in the first place. So that was like swapping out this habitual interpretation, which is everybody's always noticing what I'm doing and judging it in some
mm,
way as to whether or not it's acceptable, and replacing that with a different kind of interpretation, which is still motivated similarly, but instead is like, yeah, probably they have their own things going on. They're concerned with their own affairs and so on. And that really did provide a certain amount of relief for me. It was helpful. But what it didn't address was the that underlying motivation, that underlying pattern of looking at another person's face, interpreting their facial expression as meaning something about me, and then immediately acting in order to intervene in some way. And even my desire to change how I interpreted other people's facial expressions, it was still motivated by that same basic understanding of what was at stake, that being people disapproving of me. So
mhm,
there's really something powerful, I think, in knowing that there's a totally different way of working that doesn't have to do with renouncing our typical ways of interacting, doesn't have to do necessarily with intentionally improving upon them, and instead is all just about freeing them up, finding the choicefulness in them from
Mhm.
perception on up through interpretation, response, and justification.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, I think well, that's a good teaser. Maybe we should after we've completed this first part of the course where we're really focusing on perception, then we'll do part two, which is highly focused on interpretation. And you kind of queued it up perfectly there of kind of saying, you know, a common approach is switching out an interpretation with another one and then seeing how the behavior changes. Um, on the flip side, you can also do the inverse, which is switching up the behavior and seeing how the interpretation switches. And yeah, I guess the radical thing here is, to your point, freeing them up, which really is about seeing them clearly. And the interpretation one, we'll do a whole conversation on it. But the shocking thing for me about the interpretation is it is quite a it can be quite a process. We call the core method in that interpretive space we call is unraveling interpretation. And man, n- we hide a lot of things about how we interpret the world from ourselves, intentionally and non-intentionally. I don't know, both. And that was the thing that was the most surprising in the Kaleidoscope stuff is that it was like it took me months of noodling around what seemed like the interpretation there to kind of really find the core of it and to find it and not have the agenda of replacing it, but just seeing what it was. That clarity can have the ability to let it be free. You know, it's like you see it as it is. And then gives you um, I think maybe, I think part of it for me was like knowing my interpretation made it that much more obvious when it was being applied in a context that it did not fit or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And so just to really underline it, so coming up very soon, we have a course through Kaleidoscope of Interaction that is focused on liberating perception. Later on, we'll have another course that's about unraveling interpretation, and then a final one that's about the response. And good news, this feels important to say, good news for anybody who's interested in the liberating perception part of this, because even in our talking, I mean, we immediately go to interpretation because it is often the first thing that we will notice and the
mhm,
thing that seems to be the most difficult for so many people. The really good news is the more one learns to liberate perception, the less problematic all the other steps seem to be. And in fact, because all of them arise from the initial perception, finding awareness or having awareness find you through the initial coming together of that pattern of sensation that we call perception, it just makes so much choicefulness, so much freedom available in the interpretation that arises next, in the response that we enact because of the interpretation. So much relies upon the initial perception that
mm.
I think it's in many ways one of the most important places to do the most work.
Yeah, um, without getting too esoteric, um, each one of these, uh, the domains, the perception, interpretation, and response, kind of fall in different um, aspects of our experience. And the perception one is the most broad and uh, unchanging. Simple perception of what's happening in context is there's it looks very similar regardless of the context that you're in. You know, there's a flavor of what it's like to be in presence, to be in direct contact with perception, and it's always pretty much the same. The content's different, and so it is the broadest kind of foundation that we. That's why we start there, and then interpretation gets narrowed a bit. It's something a little bit more about yourself, your personality, your history. Uh, your self beliefs, your other beliefs, your worldviews, all these things. And so it starts to get more narrow and more individuated. And then the reaction, even more so, because now you're a in the world, making changes, impacting people very specifically. And so it's kind of the most narrow. So we start at this broad domain and then move to the very contextual and specific. For the Vajrayana nerds, we start at the Dharmakaya, we move into the Sambhogakaya, and then the Nirmanakaya. So yeah, it's cool, elegantly put together thing. I think David and Charlie constructing it it's a brilliant little system.
I think so too. And props to you for not saying any Sanskrit or Tibetan or anything like that until right at the end. You did very well. So I think you really outlined how this upcoming course sits within the larger framework of Kaleidoscope, and gave a bit of a teaser of how that could relate to mm, really some kind of esoteric information coming from Tibetan Buddhism, in particular from Vajrayana and Dzogchen.
Yeah.
Um, I'm tempted. I'm tempted to go there a little bit here at maybe the back end of our conversation, but before you indulge me in wanting to talk about lineage, like where this comes from. Anything else to say about the Kaleidoscope course itself, the framework that it relies upon, the methods there?
Hmm. Um, I mean, I guess a couple things that might feel important to kind of pull everything together. One, if you are interested in joining the course, the methods that we do are primarily interactive things. So you're working with partners, you're working in groups, and so both the method and the actual results, of how it shows up in your life, are all in interaction, and it's built that way. And for speaking a little bit about uh, the Vajrayana, the Buddhist kind of frameworks and lineage, the whole system was constructed from these principles, and yet the style of the methods is showing up in very contemporary ways that should be completely accessible to anybody, regardless of whether they've uh, been empowered and been bopped on the head by the right lamas and all of the things. We tend to be pretty contemporary in the way that we present stuff, and each year less and less Sanskrit and Tibetan, and we've gotten quite good at speaking mostly plain English, even though it can be a little. I don't know what would our language be? Maybe a little nerdy, STEMmy, intellectual or something. I don't know. Overly precise or persnickety about little
Yeah,
tiny definitions or something.
very precise. I mean, so precise that we in evolving ground in our community, we tend to reinvent the language quite often,
Mhm.
because our circumstances are always changing. The ground under our feet is constantly changing.
Evolving.
So, oh,
Oh,
I can't even pretend to be amused about it anymore. Honestly, I've made that joke so many times now. Uh, Um, this is truly one of the things that, maybe the thing that is the most exciting for me about Evolving Ground as a project. It's taking these lineages of Buddhism that are, more than 1,000 years old, even if we're just looking at Vajrayana, at Tibetan Buddhism, and finding ways to represent it in our contemporary context, mostly Western contemporary context. And it's such an exciting project. I see Kaleidoscope of Interaction as really representing that project. I mean, it's representing something that is in some ways so incredibly esoteric, would have been probably reserved for some sort of like, inner core of like a secret community in years past, and is presented in a way that just sort of reveals the ordinary aspects of experience that are available to work with through these methods.
Yeah, yeah, I guess I'll, uh, I'll one up that, like, except to
Uh
the self complimenting that we're giving each other. We're gonna
huh.
take this compliment and break our previous patterns of, yeah, I think we're doing some pretty cool stuff. I really like it. And yeah, particularly for me, the thing that I love the most about it is that it makes these practices that have been unbelievably transformative and kind of revelatory in my own life available to people, whether they have the interest in the kind of uh, historical lineage and tradition based way of that usually that you would get involved with these types of these practices and methodologies.
Mm, can't wait.
Cool. Well, I think we did the thing. Part two, we'll do a whole deep dive on interpretation. That one will probably be interpretation is notorious, so we'll probably end up talking for like 3 hours or something. But 40 minutes
We
that seems
could,
is
we
pretty
could,
good.
we're in real danger of doing that. I think in interpretation in particular. And how about that will be a good point to save the esoteric conversation that I wanted to have, which was about karma. I think that's what I would love to find a way of weaving that into our discussion about interpretation and response, and the way that that's a contemporary way of understanding this kind of esoteric, certainly ancient concept of karma.
Ooh, yeah. What a cliffhanger. What a cliffhanger. Proper job, marketing job, as a previous marketing exec. So yeah, good work, good work.
Thanks, Jared. I
All
appreciate it.
right. Well, I'll see you on in the community and hopefully anybody who's watching that's join. We'll see you at the course.
See ya.